So today, you will learn about the Condor Legion, which was the German military contingent that fought in the Spanish Civil War. This excerpt that I'm going to present to you is from the first lesson of our Luftwaffe course, from the first to the last day. Enrollment for this course is open. If you like the material I'm about to present, consider signing up. It's really easy to do. Just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description to enroll. That's where his passion for the Stuka comes from, right? Well, then the Luftwaffe will have a chance to prove itself. Its first big chance to prove itself will come about 1.5 years after it was created, right? With the Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War began in Spain in the summer of 1936. The country is completely split into Republican and nationalist zones of influence. The nationalist faction ends up being led by General Francisco Franco. But Francisco Franco, up until that moment, was the commander of Spanish forces in Spanish Morocco in North Africa. And where was most of Francisco Franco's army in North Africa? And Franco was very anxious about being able to transport his troops to Spain. So he goes there and asks Hitler and Mussolini for help. And immediately, Hitler and Mussolini respond. And the first action these two countries take to support the nationalists is the airlift across the Strait of Gibraltar, right? Which is the first military airlift in history, in which the Junkers 52 and the Savoia Marchetti 81 will transport Franco's troops back and forth there.
Yeah.
From one port to another, right? From one airport to another. And very quickly, they'll be able to transport Franco's army to Spain, right? As for the fighters that would see action at the very beginning of the Spanish Civil War and the German air intervention, its air component was initially made up of three fighter squadrons, which became known as Jagdgruppe 88, okay? There were 3 Staffon, or squadrons, of Heinkel HE-51. Here, as you can see, this is not a Luftwaffe marking, this is a Spanish marking, right? Spanish nationalist marking. So these are the first German combat aircraft that will arrive there in the Spanish theater of operations, right? The first commander of the Condor Legion is General Hugo Spelle. Hugo Spelle. One of the guys with the most fearsome features in Germany. Big, extremely tall, broad, even broader than Gehler actually, with that monocle that Gehler never used, right? In fact, like when Hitler wanted to impress Kurt von Schuckner, who was the Austrian chancellor, right? In 38, to be able to force his hand to give in, to open Austria to the German army, he summoned Schuckner for a conference up there at the Obersalzberg, right? And he made a point of having at his side in that meeting what he called my 2 most fearsome generals. The scariest, right? Hitler says that my 2 scariest generals, who was the future commander of the Sixth Army, right? General Walter von Brauchitsch and General Hugo Spella, right there beside him. So the fighter component, it's going to start off pretty slowly, right? The first planes, they arrive boxed up there and will be assembled. As they were assembled, they were sent into combat, right? And then one of the first pilots who was also one of the first pilots of the Luftwaffe, right? He was there in March of 35. March of 35. The guy was in the first batch of Luftwaffe pilots. Who was he? Adolf Galland here. Look, the well-known Adolf Galland. And then in August 1936, he goes to Spain, right? Along with the first batch of pilots as well. There he will take command of one of the HE-51 squadrons, right? He will take command of the Zweiterstaffel, which is the second squadron. The second squadron of 12 aircraft there. So Adolf Galland, he has an idea. He says, wait a minute, what if I start dropping bombs on top?
Yeah.
From above, right? Over the nationalist front line against the Republican troops, right? What if I start doing that? Cool. He starts dropping bombs at low altitude. And the result of that is fantastic. The result of that, Franco personally calls the Germans. Hey, I want more of that, okay? Help me more with that, because a certain region needs it. Then he sends the second Staffel there. Why did Galland have this idea? Because the HE-51 wasn't a very good plane, right? It wasn't a very good fighter. It had difficulties against the Polikarpov I-15 and the Polikarpov Oy-16 mainly. It had several difficulties. It had many limitations compared to those two models. The main fighter aircraft of the nationalist forces at that time was the Italian Fiat CR-32. Okay, it wasn't the Heinkel HS-51. So the Heinkel HS-51 is a very limited aircraft. And then Galland had this insight. What if I started dropping bombs? Sperle liked that so much, right? And later, Wolfram von Richthofen, who was Manfred von Richthofen's cousin, right? The Red Baron. Future Field Marshal, Wolfram von Richthofen. Both of them would come here to the SA, Marshalato. Wolfram von Richthofen then turned that into a Schlachtflieger squadron. Okay, Schlachtflieger means attack aviation. So attack aviation was born at that moment in March 1937 when Galland decided to use the planes in a different way from the original concept. Yeah. And then, at the end of that year, 1937, the first three Junkers Ju-87 Stuka will also arrive in Spain. Stuka. Stuka is, let's say, a contraction of Sturzkampfflugzeug, right? Which means dive bomber aircraft, okay? Fighter aircraft. No, attack aircraft. Field, camp, fight, dive combat aircraft. So, it's the quintessential dive bomber, right? The Stuka A has this really heavy landing gear fairing, which later will be narrowed. And then Galland had already returned to Germany, okay? The General Stumpf called him back to Germany so he could basically write the Night Fighter manual. Sorry, the ground attack manual for the Luftwaffe's ground attack arm. So he goes to Berlin. There in Berlin, that's where he meets and becomes friends with Erich Ernst Tudet. So, when Galante Galland is leaving Spain, another guy's coming in, and he even bumps into him there in Spain, namely Werner Melders, who we'll talk about in a little bit, okay? But finishing up the matter of the Stukas, it is there in Spain that the coordination of ground support will be perfected. And this is already under the auspices of Richthofen. Richthofen is considered the master of ground support aviation in the Luftwaffe. So he starts perfecting this back in 1937, right? How is he going to do this? He will place Luftwaffe observers, not Army soldiers, but Luftwaffe observers, alongside the forward units on the front line, equipped with radios. And these guys equipped with radios will then communicate with the planes flying overhead, right? So the system that Richthofen develops for those who were in our other course about Brazil in World War II will be further developed to become that overjoke we saw in the second to last class, okay? So the ground support coordination system will be developed there. And then, although I don't remember it being used there in Spain, but it was developed there in Spain, the Lärmgeräte will be developed, which is what? It's the siren system, right? The siren system will be developed, its concept will be developed there in Spain. The sirens are mounted here. Look, on the landing gear of the Stukas, okay? In this area here, in the middle part of the Stuka's landing gear, one on each leg. These sirens then are activated when the plane goes into attack position, right? In fact, this type of attack here was perfected over in Spain, right? Which is the standard dive attack. The plane flies. It flies, in fact, yeah, on the floor of the Junkers. 87, they actually developed and installed a little window. The pilot could look straight down and see the target below, and that's the position you're seeing here. In this position you're seeing here, the pilot is looking through the little window, and he's seeing his target, the tank, down below. Take a look. It's when he sees the tank down below that he's going to execute the dive maneuver. He's going to roll the plane onto its back. And then, once the plane is upside down, he's going to pull the stick back. And then, when he pulls the stick back, he brings the plane around until its nose is pointed at the target. He drops the bombs and then he recovers from the dive. How does he recover from the dive? He recovers from the dive because the Junkers 87 was equipped with an extremely large elevator. Its elevator was larger than necessary, right? For an aircraft of this design, because the main function of its elevator here is to pull the plane out of the dive. So it would pull the plane out of the dive. And actually it was developed here based on experience in Spain, the automatic dive recovery system, because that existed, right, man? The automatic dive recovery system. Because during training, there was a worrying number of pilots who would simply faint. With the intense G-forces, right? The amount of negative Gs, actually, that the guy was subjected to there. Not negative, sorry. It's positive Gs during the recovery from the dive. The positive Gs, when he recovers from the dive, he will then be pressed against the seat. And the system, it would recover automatically. It forced the elevator, right? It forced the elevator up, making the plane come out of the dive. And once the system's there, the gyroscopes detected stability, it would level the plane off until the pilot regained consciousness, okay? In 1937, something new also arrived in Spain, which was the Messerschmitt Bf 109 Bertha. The first actual frontline production version of the Messerschmitt Bf 109 would arrive. The A version was indeed a production version, but it stayed in Germany for testing, right? The first version that was actually sent into combat was the B version. It arrives there in 1937, and the Germans think they're making a big impression with the plane. No, they're not making a big impression with the plane. The plane manages to be superior to the Polikarpov I-15, but it turns out to be equivalent to the Polikarpov I-16. So it's not superior to the Polikarpov 16. That's what's going to happen with the Messerschmitt Bf 109, okay? It is notably better than the Heinkel 51. So the squadrons of Jagdgruppe 88 dedicated to fighter missions, the first and the third, will be the first to be fully re-equipped with the Bf 109. The second squadron, formerly Galan Squadron, will remain equipped with the He 51 for a longer time. And then Melders, once he takes command of one of those squadrons, he will actually start flying against the Republicans, right? And the Polikarpovs. In total, Melders will achieve 14 kills in Spain, and during his combat period there, between 1937 and 1938, Melders will revolutionize fighter aviation. He will revolutionize it. The guy is the father of World War II fighter aviation. Why? Because until then, the fighter formation was a formation that the English called Vic, right? You had a leader with two wingmen. And this formation was a very tight, very compact formation. Because that's a legacy of World War I. In the First World War, the guy had to communicate with flags, with hand signals, by waggling his wings because there was no radio. So the wingmen, they have to stay close, really watching the leader to be able to understand his gestures, the gestures the guy makes with his hand. But the 109s already came out of the factory with radios, so that closeness wasn't necessary. And Molders realized the following: man, this close spacing is a disadvantage because my wingman, who is supposed to protect me, right? Why? When you have a lead plane and a wingman, the lead plane makes the attack, and the wingman protects the leader. When I'm this close, look, I'm blocking a big part of the sky that my wingman can't see. So I'm making his job harder. At the same time, since I have a radio, I don't need the guy to stay so close to me. What does Molders do? Let's move farther apart and keep more distance. We don't need to stay close. And with that, Molders manages to make life easier for his pilot, his escort pilot, right? His wingman. Then Molders does the following. I think that to improve this, we're going to have to work not with 2, but with 4. Right? Because you had 2 wingmen in the Vic formation. Then Molders thought, no, let's stay farther apart and let's act in the following way. Check this out. Fingers of one hand. Fingers of one hand. Leader wingman. Element wingman. Okay? So you have the leader who is the commander, who will order the attack, who will coordinate the attack. There's a guy who will attack together with him and 2 guys to protect the rear of the 2 who are attacking. This is very, very effective. At the same time, since they were more spread out and didn't need to fly close together, they were able to watch the whole horizon and protect themselves, right? The moment someone shouts over the radio, enemy at such and such o'clock, all 4 of them see it at the same time. All 4 are able to maneuver because they have enough distance there to maneuver and respond to that threat, right? So the finger 4 formation, it means fist. Schwarm means fist. 4-finger fist. Look at that. If you put your 4 fingers together, you'll see that it matches perfectly with the position there. It's the Luftwaffe fighter flight formation, right? So A staffel, which is a squadron, is made up of 3 staffel, 12 aircraft. Gruppe, which is 3 staffel then, that's 36 aircraft. And Geschwader, that's 4 groups. So that's 36, 64, 136, 64, 128 aircraft. Okay? There are 128 aircraft in a Geschwader. The Geschwader is the equivalent of a wing, right? Like an American wing, a British wing, and so on. And how did the Germans really take advantage of the Spanish Civil War? They took advantage by rotating their personnel very quickly. Werner Melders is one of the guys who stays in Spain the longest. He stays, I believe, more than a year in Spain. But most of the people stay there for 8 months, 10 months. They don't stay that long. And this quick turnover of people there leads to a lot of rotation. A lot of new knowledge comes in, both tactical and technical. In the Luftwaffe, those guys who gained experience in Spain returned to Germany and trained new pilots based on actual combat experience, which is something that no other European Air Force had at that time, except for the Red Air Force. Okay, that's another subject. They understood things differently. Okay, so the Germans then trained their new pilots there based on what they had actually seen in the theater of operations. Okay, and technically, right? Why the rapid technical development? The Messerschmitt DF 109B, which arrived there in 1937, quickly evolved to C, Caesar. It quickly evolved to D, Dora. And it quickly evolved to E, Emile. Okay? So, in 1939, in the first months of the year, in the last months of the war, in 1939, the first 109E were already flying in Spain. 5th generation of the airplane. So the airplane went from being a promise to actually becoming a killing machine very quickly. Why? Because the pilots passed their results and impressions to the engineers, and the engineers implemented the changes that the pilots requested. So in 1939, you really have a professional Luftwaffe, while the other European air forces are not professional. They're simply there. Repeating doctrine, right? Just as it was written back in World War I. Did you like that part of the lesson? So, don't miss the chance to watch the rest of the course and learn everything. Become a true specialist in the history of the Luftwaffe. To do that, just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description and enroll in our course, Luftwaffe from the first to the last day. I'll be waiting for you there. If you like this video, then share it with your friends and also give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to Sala de Guerra so you don't miss anything else. I'll stop here for now. Thank you again for watching, and warm regards from Sala de Guerra.